Let's begin by creating a single splitting cell with MoGraph, and specifically a cloner object. So let's jump into Cinema 4D, and we'll start with just a blank scene. So the first thing that we'll do is build the actual cell. So we want to build sort of the membrane and then also the nucleus inside. So we'll make it out of a couple of different pieces, and we'll look at that, why we're going to do that in a little bit. So we're going to make just a simple cell. Let's grab a sphere. Okay. Let's now create a duplicate. So I'm going to just control drag that second sphere, and let's go ahead and call this membrane, and we'll call this one nucleus. Let's go ahead and add a material, and let's put this material onto the membrane, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of transparency. Just temporarily, we'll create some nicer materials as we go through, but I'm just going to make this a little bit transparent so we can see both of the spheres. Now this nucleus sphere, I'm going to decrease the radius of it, so it's sort of inside there. So now we have two spheres, the outer one and the inner one. Now what we want to do is be able to kind of duplicate this off, split it off from this one and create a duplicate. So we can do that using a cloner object. And I'm going to set up a cloner for each one of these, and we'll see why in a second. So let's go to MoGraph, and let's bring in a cloner. And now we're going to drop the membrane sphere underneath the cloner. Let's take our transparency down a little bit so we can see that a little bit better. So you can see there's multiple spheres now. So we'll go into our cloner, and right now the count is set to 3. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 2, and I'm going to take this value in the Y down to 0. So the second clone is basically sitting right on top of the first one. Okay, if we wanted to kind of move that off, you can see we can change that value, either any of those values, the Y or X or Z. Now let's set a few keys on this. So we have our cloner. So we want to maintain sort of the look, this look, for a few frames here. So we'll go ahead and set a key for these values. And let's do that all the way up to maybe frame 15 or so. I'm just control clicking on those little dots. Okay, now at this point, we want this to start to come off. And so I want it to kind of pop off a little bit and go a little bit more sporadically than just kind of pulling gently off. And so I'll go here to maybe frame 20. And let's actually go over here. You can do this in different ways, but I want to just kind of split this off a little bit, kind of up and to the left. And we'll key that, and we can play through and see what that looks like. So it kind of pops off quickly, and if you want to, if it's too far, you can kind of bring some of those values back down to make it a little bit closer. Don't forget to key those. Okay, and now after this, I want it to kind of continue to go in that direction. So I'll again move these values kind of up like that. Let's key those again. And again, we can scrub through. Okay, now I want it to kind of stick here a little bit. So we can come in here, and let me try to copy that. So now it'll kind of stick. And I want that one to stick there just a little bit. So we'll copy that one, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a natural look. And then have it come all the way off. Go back to our cloner. Let's send it up here. And just have it keep going. So by frame 90, we'll take it sort of all the way up here. Okay, so we want to kind of keep going the whole way. Okay. It doesn't have to be exact. Now I want to also animate the cloner itself. And so we can come in here to the cloner, and instead of an object, we can go to transform. And then we can give it a little bit of movement here. So I could give it a little bit of position and rotation, key the initial values at frame 0, and then over time, We can sort of move it a little bit, make it kind of float around a little, kind of rotate it. You can key those values just so it's constantly sort of moving. And again, key those values. So we're just kind of getting the motion the way that we want it. Okay, now that's just the membrane. So we need to kind of do the same thing with the nucleus. So we'll create a new cloner, or we could just duplicate this cloner. It's a better option. So I'll just duplicate that. And let's name these. So we'll call this cloner membrane, cloner nucleus. Now let's drop our nucleus inside of this cloner. Take out the membrane. So now you can see that that nucleus goes along with that outer piece there. Okay, so it's splitting off with a single object here for a single cell, but we're not getting that kind of stickiness of the membrane where it's kind of sticking to the next one. It's just sort of coming off like that, which may be fine if you have a bunch of them and you can't really get up close, but we're just focusing on this one, so we want to make it look a little bit nicer. So what we can do is add a Metaball object, and let's go ahead and drop our cloner underneath the Metaball. So what that's going to do is wrap geometry around the geometry within our cloner. So if I just by default, or using the defaults, just play this back now, you can see that it is stretching out, and it's basically doing what we want, although the resolution isn't what we would want. So we can go into our Metaball. You can see the editor subdivision is set a lot higher than the render subdivision, so that means it's going to be a lot smoother when you render it. So if you're working with it here and you just want it to be smooth when you render, then you can go ahead and set that the way that you want it. So let's take that editor subdivision down a little bit. So you can see how that'll start to refine values there. And also your whole value, if you increase that, it's going to try to stick to your underlying geometry a little bit more, versus here where you take it down, it's going to be a little bit more overall. And so depending on what you want and the look that you want, you can change that value. So you can make that really tight, or bring it down to something like that. Okay, you'll notice that we don't see our material anymore, and that's just because this geometry is not our original sphere, our membrane sphere. This is actually a new geometry, this Metaball geometry. Okay, so we could go ahead and add our material to that, and then you can see where that membrane is still attached. Okay, if we want to, you could do the same thing on the nucleus. So we could bring in another Metaball, drop in our nucleus, and again go into our Metaball. Let's take our editor subdivision down a little bit so it's a little bit smoother. We can increase our value here, and then when those pull off, even though it's a little bit hard to see, and you could decrease that to make it a little bit more evident, but now you get the idea that they're sort of splitting off from one another, and that part is kind of the important part, that part where they're intersecting.